And we are live. What's happening, good people? Welcome, House Culture Conversations. And once again, myself along with DJ Dewey B. DJ Dewey B, another fantastic night. What was your inspiration?
Just creating some love in this world that's full of hate. I want to create some love. That's all.
Yeah, well, you were moving us tonight, man. I really appreciate it. Man, I'm my tribute tonight, I'm calling it Never Forget. This was the Never Forget mix because he brought back the old and always doing a lot of new stuff, which is fantastic. And tonight, we're going back to the origins. I am so excited to reveal our guest for tonight. And he's got a new book out. Bessie Saunders is going to talk to us about his new book, In Their Own Words. And without further ado, let's bring Jesse into the room, into the studio. Jesse, what's happening?
Hey, what's going on? How you all doing?
All right.
It's so good to see you. And we appreciate you being with us tonight to talk about the music and the culture that we love so much. How are you doing, first of all, in these challenging times?
I'm good, man. I live right by the ocean, so I'm on the beach every day. So I'm good.
Being safe, that's fantastic. And my first question to you, Jesse, is, I mean, you were there from the beginning. Why is house music as popular as it ever was?
Well, I mean, house music will never die. It's basically been around in one form or another even before we actually called it house music. I mean, we had disco, and prior to that we had swing and all the rest of this stuff. I mean, dance music is dance music, so I mean, people are always going to want to dance.
Yeah, it is amazing to see how the culture is spread, and it's phenomenal. I mean, the genre is spread, and one of the things we're going to talk about is your book, your latest book, because your first book was called House, the Real Story. And
House Music, the Real Story.
House Music, the Real Story. That book talked a lot about you and about your upbringing. A lot of things people don't know about you. You were raised in music. You've got a music background. You're pretty talented as a musician. And that was an incredible read. But this latest work, In Their Own Words, what was the inspiration for that?
Well, I just got tired of, I've been in a million documentaries, TV specials, movies, unsung, you name it. And every single time, with the exception, I'll say the exception of the last few that I had a chance to actually produce and consult, it's been pretty much the same story, with the same people saying the same things. And I just got tired of it, so it was just time to actually have a different perspective. And the perspective I thought was the most important was not the DJs, and it was not the artists and all that kind of stuff. Of course, they contribute, and they're the ones that make the music and so on and so forth and throw the parties. But the people are the ones that actually support everything. And if they're not supporting, then we have no scene, therefore we have no culture. So it was important to me to share the stories of the people who are really unsung, the people who really never get to hear their story told. The people who have no reason to embellish and or outright lie about what they did and where they were and so on and so forth. And also the perspective is just a very different one than the one you'll ever hear in a documentary or film, because those people are looking at it from the outside in, where we're on the inside out, meaning like we're on the stage and we're in the spotlight. So our perspective is basically skewed from what we're doing. As I'm playing music as a DJ, I can look up and look at the crowd, but they just look like a sea of faces. They don't look like one person unless you zero in on one person. But I mean, from their perspective, they're taking everything in, and what was going on in the back left side of the room is going to be totally different than my perspective. What I think, because I don't really know what's going on. I can just really kind of see heads again. So getting a perspective, especially when you have people that were at the same events, people that were at the warehouse together, or the music box together, or the playground together, or Saunders, or whatever it happened to be. you're going to get from 4 different people, 4 different perspectives. And all those perspectives are going to be what the music made them feel, how they danced, the friends that were there, the social aspect and whatnot. And again, they have no agenda. So they're going to tell you the truth. And that's really what I was trying to get to, is the truth.
Man, you did a fantastic job at that. When I pulled the book up, and I'm going to show it one more time for the folks. In their own words, Jesse Saunders, available on Amazon.com. Pick it up. I downloaded it. I ebooked it because I wanted to dive right in. And you were so right. The stories are coming from the horse's mouth. These are the people that were on the dance floor. These were people that were doing, everything around the DJ. And, of course, there's some DJs in there, but the fact of the matter is, it's so powerful to hear the stories of people just like me that were going to dance and just have a good time. And it's just an incredible labor of love, because you've got hundreds of stories in there. How'd you compile all those stories?
Well, the thing is this. I mean, the slogan for the book is the untold stories from the people who lived it, loved it, and discovered it along the way. And that pretty much encompasses everyone that's been a part of this music. And again, before it was actually called house music, when it was disco, when it was Motown and dance music, when it was Sly and the Family Stone, talking about dance to the music, all of the evolution comes from the soul and the rhythm of wanting to move your body, and it makes you feel good. So that's really what house music's all about. And I probably had about 300 plus stories submitted. And at the end of the day, it's still, as much as I would love to use everyone's story, it's still a literary work. So as such, it has to conform to a certain standard, which meant that I spent most of my time trying to go through stories to pull out the actual stories, the who, what, where, when, hows, and all that kind of stuff. Because a lot of people write the way they talk. They don't give you much background. They don't tell you where. They don't say who was there a lot of times and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So it's like the description is the most important part. So I had to pull out of their stories all of that to make it flow. And then on top of that, let me go back even a little bit more. The reason why I wrote this book, even before it became, the unsung story of all the people who were part of it, the reason why I wrote it was because I felt that if I wrote a second book, what would be the easiest way to do it? Because I'm not, at the end of the day, I guess I am now, but I'm not a writer. I never considered myself a literary, writer or anything like that. Yeah, I had creative writing. I got A's in it in school and all 9 yards, but I'm not sitting up here trying to write a whole book, right? I wrote the first one because my mom passed in 98, and I felt it was the best way I could give tribute to her was to write down all of the things that this meant to me and how her part in obviously being my mother and molding me and putting me in these situations. That was the best thank you I felt I could do, was to just kind of outline what happened and how she's a big supporter of it. So that came just from the love pretty much of the music and my mother. So the second time around, I thought to myself, well, I'm not doing that again. I'm not a writer. I don't want to be sitting up writing all this stuff and whatnot. So I said, you know what? The best thing to do is to get other people to write their stories. And I just take this collection of stories, put it together, and I have a book. Well, that was about 5 years ago. And, collecting stories through the years and whatnot. And I just kind of compiled them for the most part. And then when I got serious and said, you know what, I need to finish this book. So I delved into it and I got into reading everything. And that's when I ran into the problem of trying to figure out, well, these people aren't writers. So I got to figure out how to actually make these stories make sense. And then I thought about it. I was like, well, I can't just throw the stories there because then there's no cohesive. Then it needs a timeline. It needs to go through different things and successions of things that happened and people. So then I started saying, okay, well, we're going to start. Initially, we were going to start at disco, right? So as I went through and I wrote the chapters and whatnot, and I found the stories that would fit in each chapter and kind of put a semblance of an actual book together, table of contents and everything, right? Then I thought to myself, when I was looking around to do some more research on disco, the first question I asked, and I asked my cousin Kirk Townsend this too, because he was around in the disco days in the 70s, right? Another Mendel. Right. Monarch. So I asked him, and he started telling me about the Dogs of War and, you know, all these other record pools, but were mostly like Black oriented, which is great. But as we see the disco era, we remember Disco DAI. That was Peter Lewicki and that was Kenny Jason. They weren't Black. You know, so my whole thing was like, I want to get to the root of the story. I want to encompass, because I'm always inclusive of everybody. I don't care whether you're Black, white, purple, red, orange, or whatever. I just want the real story, you know? And yes, the majority of that story does involve us as an urban community and a Black people and African American people, but there were other people that were doing it too. So in essence, what I was trying to do is I want to get the real story. I'm always about the real story. So where did this come from and how? And the more I delved into it, the more I started to see there was, again, Black artists that were doing it. You know, you're talking Motown and you're talking Sly and the Family Stone. And even though a lot of those bands back in those days were mixed race and whatnot, the driving force from them were people like George Clinton and you know, excuse me, and you get into the producers, you start talking Norman Whitfield, who was actually a very dear friend of mine as well, that I learned a lot from in this business. Holland Dozier Holland, that wrote all those Supreme hits and all that kind of stuff. And just the funk and the soul. I've sat many a day in Eddie Holland's office in Hollywood, right off of Hollywood, well, on Franklin Boulevard, but in Hollywood, listening to story after story, just sitting there fascinated like a little kid in a candy store about how they created, you know, all these songs, where, you know, like how the Supremes even got their first hit, you know, how the Temptations, even later on when they had the Honeycomb, they had Want Ads and all that stuff, just listening to all these stories, man, I'm telling you, I'm not a person that generally likes to sit and listen to people talk and lecture and whatnot. But I'm telling you, I could have sat there for weeks and months and years soaking up these stories. And a few years ago, when I actually did the Motown tour to the Motown Museum, I was able to relate all of that because they still have the original equipment, the original studio. I mean, he was detailed. I could see the 4-track recorders, the 8-track recorders, the big knobs that they used, the original drum sets that the you know, people played on, the corporation and all and played on, you know, the original organ, you know, original bass and guitar amps. And I'm telling you, man, it's just like it, that was so motivating to me. That's what really made me move forward and actually writing in their own words, to be honest, because now all of this stuff is coming out and I've been able to correlate it and everything, but I digress. So let me get back to why I was writing them. So putting all that stuff together.
Before you go there, I want to say hi to everybody that's watching. I see you out there, Babu, from New Zealand. What's happening? And Jerry, a fan of the culture. We love you. So happy to have you with us. And for those of you who are tuning into the replay, much love to you. We're sitting with Jesse Saunders. He's talking about his latest book, In Their Own Words.
Right. So gathering all that stuff together and knowing that it has to become a literary work, I read through the book when I finished what I thought was the end of the book, right? And as I read through it, great stories, everything cohesive, it reads good, the whole 9 yards. I just felt something was missing. So I said, you know what's missing? What I just learned, the era that created dance music. For the most part. I mean, there's always been dance music, but I mean, as we know it, the soulful, want to move, making you feel, those kind of things. And that was the Motown era. So I had to go back into the early mid 60s to figure out where this 4 on the floor, grooving bass line, all this kind of stuff came from. Because the more I asked about the early 70s, no one really had an answer for me. So I'm like doing YouTube videos, I'm going through Wikipedias, I'm going through other people's books and everything, and not one book could pinpoint the era when disco started, right? So I took it upon myself to do that research and come up with the whole idea of what this became. So I was on the hunt. I went back and I heard a quote from Paul, well, not heard, but read a quote from Paul McCartney with the Beatles, right? So we know the Beatle invasion was like 63, 64, 65. So I'm thinking like, well, the quote said, someone asked him where he got that I'm paraphrasing, that soulful driving kind of sound in one of his songs, right? And he's like, I'm not gonna lie, I got it from Motown, right? So then I started looking at the Motown stuff, and again, I've got knowledge of Motown. I've got knowledge of those producers that did it. I know most of them, you know, before they passed on or whatever. I had long extended conversations, so now I can correlate this stuff and what's going on. I got the Isaac Hayes, I got the Curtis Mayfield, because we got to throw our Chicago people in there, right? And you know, and Norman Whitfield was probably, I'd say, the first one that really had what they call that cinematic soul sound. You know, he was doing it in like stuff like Papa Was the Rolling Stone and all that. But that was that's Detroit, right? So I get into it and I'm listening to Curtis Mayfield and Isaac Hayes. That's Chicago, right? Now Chicago and Detroit are close, you know, so there's a lot of going back and forth. People played on each other's sessions and so on and so forth. But then I got to Isaac Hayes, who his sound was in Memphis. That wasn't really Chicago, right? So now you got 3 hot spots. And actually there's a 4th one. Miami became the 4th one, believe it or not. Miami is never mentioned. But you got people like Aretha Franklin that was doing her stuff like Rocksteady and all that. Because if you listen to Rocksteady, that is a disco song, but they didn't call it disco at the time because it didn't have that 4 on the floor. It had that real syncopated, you know, kind of James Brown feel to it, right? So then I'm looking at James Brown now, right, too. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting all this stuff. To make a long story short, because I want everybody to go read the book, I don't want to tell you the whole thing. I summed it up as being, yes, you have a music scene that is a splintered fraction of what we have today, where everybody all over the world is doing. Back then, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have social media. You know, the only way you actually communicated with anybody back in those days is the phone, right? Now, who's sitting up on the phone in the studio all day saying, listen to this or whatever, and it doesn't translate. Anyway, make a long story short, Isaac Hayes did a song called Theme from Shaft. We all know that, right? Oh, yeah. Now, if you listen to that song, it has every single element that we know became disco, right? The place where people didn't seem to get it at first was that it was mostly, you know, the hi-hat, syncopated hi-hat, but the bass line coming in and those strings and horns, all that kind of stuff, that was straight Philly soul, right? But this was before Philly soul became Philly soul. So now you get into the song and I'm thinking like, okay, I think I might have found my song that I could say was like the first disco song. So I get in there and I'm like, damn, doesn't have a 4 on the floor until the very end of the song. Then it kicks in with who's the black private dick with all the singing. When that kicks in, that is straight disco. So that ahead of all the other songs that could not find all the elements blended in one place became my choice for the world's first disco record.
I agree.
Yeah. Because people want to say Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. It's like they were there, but Shaft was 1.5 years before they got there. Mm-hmm. And the whole MFSB, Mother, Father, Sister, Brother, with Earl Young on drums, who's the father of that disco beat, he was doing similarities of it. I guess what it was is he, through the years, added elements until he didn't finally get there till he got to those type of song, and especially MFSB with Love Is the Message. Love Is the Message, to me, is the most pure disco song ever recorded and ever made. Unfortunately, it wasn't released until 1974. So there you go.
That is a classic. That is a classic. So Jesse, tell us one of your most cherished stories from the book. Share a couple of them with. I'm sure you got a couple favorites.
Man, don't ask me to share the story. You know what? I'll tell you something. When you are writing, and even once you've written it and you're going over it and rewriting and editing and whatnot, I tune out to the actual writing, the story itself, because I'm concentrating now on what's right, correcting punctuality, is the story moving from one place to the other. So after I finally got done with that, I went back and read the whole thing, right? And when I could have a fresh perspective and actually read it as a reader, I don't want to even tell you which stories are because again, there's some stories and all of the stories are good, but there's some in there that are just, I mean, they brought me to tears. That's how amazing they are. Yeah. One in particular I will give you is a guy by the name of B.B. Hayes out of San Francisco. All right. He found house music in the early 90s, right? Late 80s, early 90s kind of thing, right? And he was resident at Ruby Sky, which Ruby Sky was like one of the most famous house clubs in San Francisco ever, you know, that and the End Up or whatever. But he said he wanted to write and contribute a story because after I got through with my Chicago people, I said, okay, well, now we need to go and investigate how this spread and how it got everywhere else. So I said, well, yeah, write your story, you know, and tell me, you know, some good stories about it that you experienced and the love, the whole nine. Yeah. I would check back in with him every now and then. I'm like, are you done? He's like, I've been working on this now for like 2 weeks. And I'm thinking like, well, how long is your story? And he goes, well, I'm at about 30 pages now. And I'm thinking, because when I ask people to write stories, I'm thinking like, you know, it's going to be 2, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, whatever. His story ended up being 26 pages after I edited it. Wow. I had to edit it down. But what he did was something I didn't expect in this book. He wrote his journey through house music, not just his experience, everything, how it played on his life, how it got him through some rough times, you know, how, you know, he was addicted to like some drugs and how it got him out of that. He was able to get through rehab and find a new life and a new vision and everything. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. Another great story in there. Yeah, another great story in there is Lori Branch. She wrote an amazing story. Kevin McFall, you know, he wrote a great, I mean, there's so many great stories. Robert Williams' story in there is amazing. His is the very first one because you have to start when you get to that point. The first chapter of Disco has no stories because that was my whole, I wanted to discover the origin of disco. So the second one is when Robert Williams comes to Chicago and starts making what were the foundations of what will become the Warehouse.
No, it's incredible. I tell you, Jesse, the book, I just have enjoyed it. And the stories, to your point, there's just so many of them. But the most important thing for those of us who came out of that era is you will see some people in there that you knew, that you went to school with, that you walked shoulder to shoulder with. They weren't the VIP section. They weren't the DJ. They weren't that. They were people. It's like, you know, everybody going to class. You know, some of the other things in there, Jesse, I don't know if you meant this, but I noticed that most people in the stories went off to have a career or went off to college and went off to, you know, make something of themselves. It was something interesting that I picked up by looking at the stories. It wasn't about a group of people that weren't uneducated and just wild and free. These were people that were in school. These were people that were making something of themselves and took the culture out constructively, quite frankly, to the story of Robert Williams, that it helped him turn some things around and gave him a direction and a purpose. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was incredible. And I really encourage everybody to go out and grab In Their Own Words by Jesse Saunders. Hey, Jesse, where do you see...
One thing before you go any further, let me add this. One of the things that happens to me a lot when I get interviewed, you know, for magazines or whatever, is journalists tend to want to spin a story, right? We all know that, and it gets worse as we go on. But I mean, even if they're not really spinning it, they kind of have this, we want to start at the bottom and make this amazing story grow out of nothing kind of thing, right? And I have to remind them every time, it's like, well, first off, I didn't come from the ghetto. My family was pretty well off. You know, we had summer homes and winter homes and boats and so on and so forth. So you can't use that one on me. So they're like, oh God, well, where should I start? I'm like, and what you have to also understand is house music was the product of a lot of my peers and people I grew up with that went to U-High, Kenwood, Whitney Young, Mendel, St. Ignatius, Immaculata, Seton. So, you know, their families had to have some money too, you know, but my peers were Jack and Jill. My peers were Leslie Hairston, and all these people who's aldermen now, and Alan King, and all these are my peers. So it's like we came up kind of early on in the Highlands, because Alan used to DJ all the Highland parties, all the mansion parties, we used to call them back in the day. And that's actually how we discovered him and brought him into the Chosen Few. Was like, all of those were my friends already. So I would always hang over there. And then when we started branching out and doing places, like the Tree of Life and the Blue Gargoyle and so on and so forth, those were our earliest supporters. And that's kind of how the whole thing spread. And it's like, yeah, I know you want to spin it to make this rags to riches story, but that's not, no, we were already there. We just expanded on what we already had.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I was just impressed by how authentic the book is and how it comes across. So, job well done. A question for you. Given where we are, I mean, we had the virtual party, right? Because we couldn't go out to Jackson Park. We couldn't have our festival like we normally have. And now we're virtual. Where do you see the culture and the music and technology? How's all this thing coming together and moving forward?
Well, one of the good things that's happening now, and I wish we could have gotten this together for our Chosen Few Festival, we're taking over drive-ins and parking lots and doing real festivals. You pull it in your car and you can still have the big sound system and you can still do your kind of thing. And I wish we would have had that, planned for what we did. Now, don't get me wrong. We had 92,000 plus streams on our feed for our Chosen Few Festival. And that was just amazing. People tuning in around the world and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the biggest problem is that we are people persons, people DJs. We need an audience. We want to see people vibing and feeling the music and losing themselves. And that's what motivates you to play. It's like when you're live streaming and there's nobody there, it's like there's a good thing that actually does come from that. What comes from that is it allows you to experiment more with music and play things that you probably wouldn't play because say you're in that club and maybe your crowd's not dancing as much. You go in your crate or go on your USB and try to find something it's going to make them scream and throw those hands up in the air. Well, you don't do that when you're live streaming because that's really not the way you think. It's really more about let me play a great set with some good music. Yeah, you think about what feels good, because for me, when I was live streaming more, which was before I started trying to finish the book, I couldn't live stream as much obviously then, but when I was doing that, I wanted to play inspirational music. I did a lot of gospel house, a lot of message music, a lot of things that I knew would make people feel, because especially at that time, people are losing their jobs and there's so much uncertainty out here. We didn't know how it was going to affect us. People were running and buying up all the toilet paper and everything, which I still don't understand to this day. But, it was just a lost time. So I felt that my contribution would be to give people some inspiration and something that they could feel and give them, make them feel good for that moment. And a lot of the feedback that I got, in my chat rooms was amazing. So that's what kept me going.
That is fantastic. Hey, Dewey, are you finding the same thing now that you're in this kind of virtual world? Because you can't really see the crowd, you can't feel the crowd, you're just doing your thing.
I'm just doing my thing, and I'm taking my key off of Jesse and what he was doing at the hotel in Las Vegas. That inspired me. So, I just look at that like he has always been an inspiration to me, first and foremost.
Well, thank you.
Him and Wayne and all the Chosen Few, most of them, except for the Young Bucks, have always been an inspiration to me. They have always inspired me to play the best music I can. So that's just the way I look at it. And it's good to see the excitement in his eye when he talks about this music, because that's the key right there. You see that excitement when Jesse was talking about the Motown sound. I mean, man wanted to leave. You want to leave.
You have no idea. I mean, in those moments, I was just transported. Because, I was a kid in the 60s. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I remember getting those 45s for the first time and just thinking, wow, I didn't know what Motown was. I just knew they were great songs. I like to sing along with them and everything. And then as you get a little older and I started to study music, because my mother had me taking piano lessons and flute and trumpet and drum and everything starting at the age of 5 years old. So I got on a musical journey. Then I started appreciating a little different way, you know, the way the melodies move and mold and the chord structures and so on and so forth, that if you're not a musician, you don't really think about so much, right? So then as I got a little older and actually I started making my pause button remixes, you know, at about 13 years old, because those 45s just weren't doing it for me. I needed some extended versions, and I'd hear like these really cool parts, but they'd only be like 4 bars long. I'm like, no, that needs to be at least 16 or 32. That breakdown was, and why not? Let's take that breakdown and put it at the beginning. So we started off with the vibe already, and then we go through. So that's what I was doing then. That's actually how Wayne brought me in. And we started that well, I call the second version of the Chosen Few, because the original was Batman, Jamie, and my sister's boyfriend, Ewart, Abner. And that was, you know, when he was in high school, he was, when he was at Mendel, actually, was when that started. And Batman made the speakers. That's so funny. He had these big old speakers you can't run. He made a dry ice fog machine out of a garbage can and stuff. And they used to do all these parties with it, right? So I remember I went to St. Columbanus in elementary school, and I saw them DJ a party one time, right? And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. Not that I wanted to do it. I never thought of myself as a DJ, which is the most ironic thing, obviously, of my career, but I never saw that. I felt more of a musician, more of like a producer, writer. That was my lane. Right. But being able to take two records and manipulate them in a way that they're not supposed to reminded me of me doing the same thing on my cassette deck with my pause button remix. Now I could just do it live on turntables. So when he taught me the basics of being able to like blend stuff, it's like my mind always thinks that like, okay, well, that's the basics. What can I do with it? I'm going to take it somewhere else. So I started figuring out and learning different things. Backspin. It's like everybody always looks like, because Farley was the first one to like scratch and stuff like that and do that. It's like, yeah, he was, but all the other stuff that we used to do, the backspins, the turns, twists and stuff like, because we used to battle him. Farley, myself, and Steve Hurley used to battle for days, especially at the playground, just to see who could do the most tricks on everything. And that became kind of our standard on how we judged other DJs. Like, if you couldn't do that, then you weren't in our realm. You couldn't touch us, you know, kind of thing, right? And sad as it may seem, you know, it's the truth. It's like, that's kind of the way we looked at Frankie, because Frankie could not do those tricks. As a matter of fact, a lot of Frankie's blends were just train wrecks for the most part, you know, but the music he played was so amazing, and the vibe he created, which is it taught me something now. Set the mood. You want to go from some place to the next place. You want to take it on a journey. That's where I learned that from. What I learned from Ron Hardy was that you want to beat people over the head with that stuff. You do not want people sitting down. There should be nobody sitting down in my party. I don't even want to honestly see anybody at the bar. To be honest, if you're not on my dance floor, I'm not doing my job. So, you know, so we had all of these different kinds of influences that created what we became as Chicago house music DJs. You know, I mean, unlike any other market, the only market I could think that he could even come close would be New York. But New York never did what we did with it.
True.
Yeah.
So, hey, everybody that's out there in the chat, welcome. Lillian, I see you, Donovan, and DJ John Goins. Thank you guys for tuning in. And the rest of you all that I may not be seeing because we are streaming in 3 different places, but I appreciate you guys for tuning in. And we are getting a lesson in our culture, and it is absolutely amazing. Jesse, we appreciate you so much for joining us. Any last words you leave for the audience tonight?
Go out and buy the book. One thing that I appreciate, well, let me tell this one little story before we go.
You bet.
When I did this book and finally finished it, and, you know, labor of love, the whole 9 yards, was just before the George Floyd incident, right? So when we were about to put it up and we were issuing the press release in the whole 9 yards, all of this stuff started happening. The Black Lives Matter, the protests, and all that kind of stuff. So what the problem for us was that here I have a new book coming out that needs to be promoted, but no news source will take it. No periodical. If it didn't have anything to do with George Floyd or the BLM, they didn't want to hear it. So what does that mean for me trying to promote a new book, right? And I mean, I even had some people, I did an interview on BOM with Matt McGill, and somebody called in and said, why are you all trying to promote a book when we out here trying to protest? And I thought, because I like to give everybody, their just due. I'll acknowledge whatever it is. So I thought about that for a second. I said, you know what? We are going through a pandemic, a quarantine, where we're unjustly, racial stuff, killings, all kinds of stuff. We need something to give us hope and inspiration. We don't want to sit up. I want to be angry all the time. All I want to do is see bad stuff and all this. No, that's what music has been. Music was going to the wayside. I mean, when I started, like, go back to these days when I was doing this stuff, and even into the 90s and early 2000s, we were making money. I mean, real money from songwriting, from publishing, from performances, the whole 9 yards. Digital comes along, all of that just started to dwindle. All of it started to dwindle. And you went from like myself, from getting like 5-figure checks every quarter to getting 4 to getting 3. So my checks had started to dwindle down all the way to like $400 or $500 a quarter from being 5-figure check, right? So I'm not saying that to brag or anything, but I'm saying it because that was the state of the music business. And that happened to a lot of my peers and a lot of people that I've written with and worked with and so on and so forth, where you couldn't make a living off of music anymore. I mean, this is all I've ever done. I've never had a job. I've never gone to, had a 9-to-5 or done any of that stuff. So this is my livelihood, right? So for me, it got to a point where I was just like, okay, well, if I get a check, it's great. I'll use it, take a couple people out or something, put some gas in the car, and I'm good, right? But what happened during this pandemic, everyone turned to music. All DJs playing it, stations popping up, every podcast here, everybody running the Track Source and Beatport and all the other streaming sources, even Spotify and all these, everything started going up. I got my first check, which would reflect that period, in June, right? In June, my check was almost 4 times what it had been the previous quarter. And I sat there and I was just like, wow. Because, with everyone being there and having to listen, people are going to be more into music, going to stream it more. They're going to buy it more, the whole 9 yards, right? But I didn't think it was going to be to that magnitude. So what I will say, the positives that have come out of this quarantine and pandemic is it's gotten people back to actually appreciating buying and streaming music again, which consequently has made more people want to do it. So you've got your really great producers and remixers and songwriters and vocalists. I've never seen so many amazing vocalists that are out right now, especially in house music. I mean, one particular person I'd like to shout out is Vanessa Jackson out of South Africa. She is amazing. And if you have not tuned in to her Facebook, she does live streams her session. She is recording live when she does this. This girl is amazing. Type of thing that, like, I want to see you on stage. If you do that in the studio with headphones and a microphone on with nobody there, I want to see what you do in front of an audience, And Carla Prather, I'm working on a song with her now. We had her on Our Chosen Few last year. Amazing. I mean, just I think that we have rolled the clock back 10, almost 15 years to where we were, where music is substantial again. And it's actually making a sense and making difference now.
Oh yeah.
Man. Well, Jesse, I again appreciate you taking the time out just to share with our family and the culture and the people that love the music and love the culture and love you. And we appreciate you so much. Dewey, any final comments and shout outs for Jesse?
Buy the book. Buy that book and buy
that book. I lost my point. Let me finish this real quick. The reason why I said that was because we had to come up with an alternative way of promoting it, right? Mm-hmm. So my publicist was just like, well, you don't even need to pay me because I can't really do anything for you at this point. So I'm like, okay, what can I do that will stimulate sales and get people to notice and stuff like that. I came up with this idea because, you know, the Vintage House podcast that Lori and Kevin and excuse me, Lauren do, they've been doing for a while, you know, and they came up with the idea, well, let's feature all of the people that are in the book. Let's do, you know, a couple each day for like a month, you know, and every single day from June 4th on, we featured from people from the book, and we started getting people tuning in, and I would watch just like sales, and I was just amazed. We were #1 in Amazon for 7 weeks straight, which just goes to show you the power of social media is there. You know, you don't have to spend $100,000 promoting something. You can do it if you do it right.
That's right.
So everybody go out, buy the book, not only because you want to support Jesse, but you're going to get an education. You're also going to learn the stories that are going to take you back, and you're going to fellowship once again with the origins of house music and fall in love all over again. This is House Culture Conversations, and you've been hanging out with Jesse. Hey, Jesse, any shout outs or anything you want to promote besides?
Well, you know, I got to shout out my chosen few brothers, of course. My brother, my big brother, Wayne Williams. And then, of course, we have Tony Hatch. I'm going to actually say them in the order that they became chosen few members. So, Wayne, and then Tony Hatchett, and then, well, there's always a debate whether it was Andre or Alan. So we'll just go with Alan first, Alan King, because he was already there, and then Andre Hatchett. So we were the chosen few as those numbers for many, many years. It wasn't until the winter of '89. I got to tell this little story because people always ask me, how did the chosen few get to be so big and how did it come about? I was like, well, we never planned it that way. As a matter of fact, we were really not together. We didn't officially break up as a chosen few. We just, everybody kind of went their own separate ways. Alan went to college and then law school. I moved to LA to California. Wayne actually moved away for a little while, but came back. Tony moved to Houston. So we were all kind of like in different places. So the winter of '89, I'm talking to Alan and Tony and Kim Parham, because Kim back in the day was my girlfriend back in the early days, right? And then later on, her and Alan actually were together for a while when they went to school. They went to Augustana together. So that just means she's just an amazing woman. I don't want you thinking anything else about her, trust me. But we all were talking on the phone one day. We were running like a 4-way conversation. And we said, God, miss those days. Because it had only been, maybe 9 years since then, which, seemed like a lifetime at that particular point. But we all like, God, we missed that. The loft parties and everything were just amazing. We should do one. And we're like, okay, let's find a loft. So we found one. And we decided to throw this party like the old loft, right? So we set it up and promoted it and whatnot. And here comes the day. This place had no heat. Now we're in the dead of winter. This is like Christmas time, right? They had one space heater for the whole space. So we're freezing in there. So opens up at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, we're sitting there. Nobody's there. 10 o'clock. Nobody's there. 11 o'clock, nobody's there. And then at 11:45, because we must have done something for midnight. I think it was like the price went up at midnight or something, right? At 11:45, there was a line all the way down the block around the corner and whatnot. And within like 15, 20 minutes, that place was packed. And we went till like 5, 6 in the morning, and it was just like the old days, the best party we had been to in years. So Tony and I, being from warm climates, so living in warm climates, were like, we aren't doing this again. We're not doing Christmas when it's cold. So if we do it again, we need to do it in the summer, right? So Wayne just happened to be there because Wayne wasn't a part of this thing when we decided to throw it, right? So Wayne happened to be, and Kirk was there as well. As a matter of fact, we weren't selling any alcohol or anything, so they decided they were going to set up their own bar in our party and sell alcohol. And it was like, okay, whatever. It's my brother and my cousin. I don't care. Do whatever. We just wanted to have the party, right? So Wayne's like, we should make this a chosen few event and do it in the summer. So that summer of 1990, the Hatchets used to do a 4th of July get together. So basically, what we did was we took over the Hatchet 4th of July party, and that's what became the Chosen Few picnic.
Now, see, now you know, folks. Now you got a little bit of history, where it came from, where it all started from. Thank you so much, Jesse, for hanging out with us.
Oh, sure, man. I can talk forever, so you got to shut me up, man.
Somebody to me, they said, well, you invited me to the show.
Sure, I'll sit up here and interview you. You know, that's actually what we did on Vintage House, was the interviewers got interviewed by me. That was the very first thing we did on June 3rd to kick off that whole In Their Own Words tour kind of thing, right? So I interviewed Lori and Kevin, and then I took it over and started doing my own version every day. Every day at 8 p.m. Central, we brought in 2 new people. And that became a thing where even when I finished it, because we finished it the day before the picnic, well, the live stream, our live stream, and I had Alan and Wayne on and Carla Praise. I said I was going to be the last one. And I thought to myself, it'd be such a shame to just stop this, because it's been so amazing. And we've talked to so many people that I never would have talked to, and we've gotten amazing stories. So I turned it into a weekly show on Sundays where we did a city tour. So what we do, we go in and explore each city and find the origin of how house music got to that particular city, how it's grown, and what's come out of it and whatnot. So I just did LA last Sunday. That was fun.
That is awesome. And Alien says it best. Thanks so much, Jesse. And again,
thank you for listening.
Tuesday, right here, same time, same place. We are going to be chopping it up and talking about the culture that we love so much and the music. We'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Peace, everyone. Go get the book.
Get the book.